an abandoned hotel which has been standing for like, what, I don't know, 20 years. A place where the skeleton staff that remain there, they literally saying like, don't go to the second floor, it's haunted. So like, society secretary comes out and he's like, you can't film anymore unless you pay, I don't know how much money he was asking production. So they were trying to extort us. And like, I remember at that moment, like I was gonna go to the secretary's office and start smashing windows, but the production had to kind of like hold me back. But basically, I was receiving this horrific reaction by this group of critics who if I ever see them, I will just push one of them off a balcony like that scene in Cloud Atlas. I mean, some of these critics are just scum, right?
Bollywood Crypt, Asia's Betaal of the Bizarre.
Welcome to the Director's Cut podcast brought to you by Bollywood Crypt, featuring a number of genre filmmakers from the realms of horror, science fiction and fantasy. And today we have a very special guest, Patrick Graham, who is also the filmmaker who made Ghoul, Betaal and the most recent serial killer documentary, The Dupatta Killer. Welcome, Patrick. Welcome to the Crypt. And it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Could you just give us a small introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Patrick Graham. I am a filmmaker from the UK. I am from a small village in the southwest of England. I studied at University of London, then London Film School. I did filmmaking, and I came to India in 2010. And I have been here ever since, making films, what I hope to be a kind of significant shows for the genre, for the horror genre, as well as delving into documentary, writing a dystopian sci-fi series called Layla. And now I am currently pitching a number of different horror films. I have co-written a book with my very close friend Luke in Japan. And I love just all things genre related, and especially, of course, horror. And I very much admire your passionate
Thank you.
promotion of the genre. And India has, of course, so much to offer when it comes to horror and ghost stories and folklore and mythology. And it's my ambition and my hope, even if I'm not involved, that the rest of the world gets to see a bit of that.
So tell me, as a filmmaker and a genre filmmaker, how has your Scottish upbringing and your childhood had an effect on your filmmaking?
Well, so I'm kind of Scottish by ancestry, but I've never actually lived in Scotland, right? So I grew up in the southwest of England. I was born in London, but I grew up in the southwest of England. So I came from small farming country villages, and the main town that was nearby, which, you know, it's relatively mid-sized, but you'd consider it kind of slightly more in the sticks than somewhere like London, for example. I had a very, very happy time in the countryside. Went to a very nice school, and I have nothing to complain about, which is why it's a bit weird to me that I'm, you know, so passionate about horror. But I suppose the thing is, I always loved ghost stories, and for some reason I gravitated towards tales of the supernatural. So, you know, when relatives would come over or friends would have ghost stories and spook stories, I'd always enjoy listening to them. And I think as a result, because of maybe an overactive imagination, I used to get very scared of, you know, the dark and, you know, being on my own at night. There were certain films and shows that really scared me, so much so that I ended up sleeping with the light on until I was about 14, which is a bit embarrassing. But I've always just gravitated towards these horror stories.
And how did this influence get you into filmmaking?
Well, I would credit quite a lot of my interest in filmmaking with my brother, Matt Graham, who is a screenwriter who lives in LA. He is my senior by 4 years, and he basically So the house that I grew up in had a number of like VHS tapes, right? So some of the VHS tapes was like Monty Python. So I just religiously from a very early age was watching Monty Python. Then we had 2001: A Space Odyssey. So when you're at an early age, you'll just you'll consume things, and for some reason you'll kind of create an obsession around them. So I remember certain films, 2001 being one, the Monty Python shows. And kind of BBC dramas and stuff like that, and just kind of watching them again and again. And my brother developed this interest in film, and that filtered down to me. So I would always be very envious of when he could watch films that I wasn't allowed to watch, like Aliens and Predator and Terminator and Dawn of the Dead and blah blah blah. So I used to kind of sneak outside the window and just peer in while he was watching these films. And I think maybe that also kind of fueled this interest in the genre, stuff that I wasn't allowed to see, mysterious, tantalizing. So I think we grew up in quite a film buff household, and I learned a lot from my brother, and I think his passion for films and cinema basically led to my own, because at that age you pretty much do what your older brother does, to be honest.
Any of the Hammer films or the Amicus films have any kind of influence while growing up?
So not especially. I would say that of course I was aware of Hammer horror more than Amicus, but my awareness kind of extended as far as stuff like Dracula, and even then the Hammer Dracula films I came to later, probably after the Bela Lugosi Dracula, right? So I actually kind of watched the Universal classic monsters like Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, etc. probably first, and then the Hammer stuff, which was probably a bit more adult, it had more kind of boobs and blood, etc., etc. I probably came to that a bit later, in a curious cinephile way, and of course, recently there was attempts at reinvention, wasn't there? There was The Woman in Black, that was Hammer. But no, I wouldn't say that kind of more kitsch, over-the-top horror was really my scene. But on a kind of a cinephile point of view, it's very interesting.
So what led you to come to India and explore Bollywood cinema and become a filmmaker over here?
After film school, I graduated in 2008, and we were in a time of recession. It was quite difficult to get a job. I was living in London, but not earning very much. I was on benefits. I had my housing payments done by the council. I was a bit of a freeloader, I guess. But it was a very expensive city. It was hard to get a job, and I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know how to get into the industry. I had no idea, and I had bad advice from the film school. And I think they frequently used to give this advice, which is like, you've been to film school. That's an apprenticeship. You don't need to become an assistant, which is absolutely the wrong advice. The opposite you should be telling an entitled film student is that they shouldn't slum it. They absolutely should. But I didn't realize that. So I ended up kind of rustling enough together to get my own camera and equipment, tripod, Steadicam, sound recording equipment, lights, and I used to make kind of corporate videos and promos, and at the same time I'd have a bar job, and at the weekend I'd be filming at this school. So I had like multiple jobs at the same time, and I was like, okay, but where do I go from here? I made some short films. None of them were very good. And then my friend who I went to film school with, he lived in Mumbai, and he suggested in 2010 that I come out to India and we kind of try and work together and try and make a production company. And because he already had contacts in the industry, it was a much shorter path towards getting your foot in the door. And because of a certain, I suppose, there's a kind of class issue there, which is, if you have been to film school at that time in 2010, if you've been to film school, rich kids know other rich kids. So there was a kind of short track, a fast track, if you were part of this kind of clique. So we kind of piggybacked off that, and yes, we did get meetings, we had a few opportunities, we got people to read our scripts, we got meetings. So, I feel like we were able to kind of jump the queue slightly, but then maybe not as well. I ended up stopping working with that guy, met other people I acted in a show, the show called Bring on the Night, and I kind of through this I started learning more about the industry, meeting more people. I started making adverts, doing a bit of acting, and then luckily one of my scripts that I had written with this guy, it got interest from a bunch of different people. I think it still gets interest actually, even though it's not very good. And it attracted the interest of Phantom Films, and that was when I met Vikramaditya Motwani and Neha Sinha and Deepa de Motwani at Phantom Films. They were looking for horror as part of this new Blumhouse slate, 5-film deal. And they were looking for that first horror film, and I think that they were looking for something that would fit into the Blumhouse model, which is slightly more Western. You know, I think the thought was, you know, we want a horror film that might go beyond Indian borders and Indian audiences. So I think that that's where, at that time, a Western face kind of fit with what they were looking for. So because they were interested in this script that I had, a spec script that I had written before, but because of various reasons, they couldn't get hold of it, and I didn't own the rights to it anymore. So then I just pitched them another idea, just said, let me get on with this. They liked the idea, so I wrote the first script. Vikram Motwani is he always has the best feedback. He can be a little intimidating, and I remember very well when I submitted the first screenplay of first draft of Ghoul, he was like, and that was when it was a film, he was like, Patrick, it's not scary. It's not scary. He just like, and I was like, oh, well. I got very defensive because, you know, at that time, I'm kind of insecure, overconfident, arrogant young man, but then I walked all the way back from Andheri to Bandra, kind of almost sobbing, but then realizing actually he's right, it's not scary. So then I just wrote a second draft. It took a bit of time, but yeah, they were very good. Phantom, they were awesome, and yeah, we developed the script, and we developed it over a nice long period of time. I think in the end it was about 1.5 years we were writing Ghoul. It was very, very smooth process, and very, very lucky that it happened the way it happened.
How did the work atmosphere in India differ, or in Bollywood differ from the Western and the English, cinema?
Well, that's the funny thing, right? It's like, I don't know, because I've never worked professionally as a filmmaker. I mean, when I was in the UK after film school, but before I came to India, the maximum I was doing was like music videos or corporates or promos, right? You know, small gigs with my own little one-man crew. So I was never on a big TV show or film set. I was just never on one, even as an assistant. So I don't know what the industry is like in England to date. You know, there are plenty of filmmakers from India who have worked in the UK, and I'm like, so what's it like? You know, because I don't know. Maybe one day I will find out. Maybe, you know, I do hope one day to work in other markets as well, and maybe go back to the UK, make stuff in the English language, which would be a nice change. And so, I just don't know. I'm used to how it is in India. Like, that's all I know. And every time on a film set, I love it. And I think that probably film shoot problems are the same everywhere. They just kind of differ by degrees and nuances. But shooting in India, from what I gather, it's actually quite liberating in some ways, because like you don't have this obsession with health and safety, so you know you can do things, you can get things done. There's a kind of jugaad mentality. Things are a bit cheaper. Your money can go a little further. There's great crews out here, very hardworking people, great technicians. So that's what I know, and that's what I love.
Coming from a European background, how easy is it to understand an Indian audience? Especially as a writer and a filmmaker, how do you, involve the audience into your films?
Well, I'll be completely honest, it's difficult because I've grown up with a certain type of film and a certain type of literature and a certain type of TV show, right? So that is in my blood. And the reason I love cinema as much as I do is because of mostly Western cinema, but it could also be world cinema, massively influenced by Japanese, South Korean films, of course, other European films, especially French films. Until I got to India, I really knew very little about Indian cinema. And I think to date, if you're not part of the Indian diaspora, you probably don't even know who Shah Rukh Khan is. you probably don't even know who Salman Khan is. You're probably you won't have watched any Bollywood, you won't have watched any Indian cinema. I know that's a massive generalization, but I can say to my friends back in England, guys, I met Shah Rukh Khan. I'll be like, who? Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I've always felt that that crossover between cultures just hasn't happened. And I think that part of the reason is because Indian cinema and Indian TV is so specific to the Indian audience requirements, and that is so alien to the rest of the world, that for me, yeah, it's difficult because I don't have an affinity for that material necessarily. And if I am to appeal to the Indian audience, I have to do my research, I have to really figure it out, I have to talk to people, I have to read, I have to watch a lot of research films and shows, and it doesn't come naturally, which is why I have kind of positioned myself more in this genre space, because I feel like there is a requirement of a slightly Western perspective to come into the genre space in order to maybe help make a horror film that translates to the rest of the world with unique Indian themes and stories. I just don't think it's happened. And I suppose my ambition has always been and remains to try and make a film which would appeal to, say, a Western audience, which is rooted in Indian mythology or folklore or storytelling. Maybe that's in English, maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be in an Indian language like Hindi, but that has been my ambition, and maybe I've been close. I think Ghoul almost got there. I think a lot of people in India would say that Ghoul does feel a bit too Western for them, for example. When I tried to be a bit more kind of mass appealing with Betaal, I think I made some mistakes, right? Like on the one hand, I was a bit too maybe self-indulgent with the kind of horror I was presenting. On the other, maybe I made it too open to the rest of the family that it just became not quite one thing or the other. So it is tough, but I feel like at this stage of my career, I've been here long enough and I'm ready to kind of start being a little bit more kind of mass appealing to the audience.
What drew you to horror as a genre, as a filmmaker, and how do you relate to it, especially in an Indian context?
So I think, first off, my instinctive just love for ghost stories, I think, and I enjoy scaring people, whether it be hiding behind a door and jumping out on my mother with a mask on, or just, you know, making spooky sounds in the university corridor at night, whatever. But I think one thing remains true to this day, which is there are a lot of filmmakers who started out in horror, right? So I was looking at people like Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi, for example, who started their careers with low-budget horror films and then went on to kind of branch out. I always felt like that was a model that appealed to me, because you can make a good horror film for relatively little and it can go relatively far, because the horror audience doesn't really mind as long as it's good, right? And language doesn't matter so much as long as it's good. So there's a language of horror that translates around the world, and if you can get it right, then if you see a film like Talk to Me, you know, it can make hundreds of millions off a relatively small budget. So that was always appealing. And I also realized when I got to India that because I'm not Indian, and I never will be, and I never will understand certain nuances and idiosyncrasies, as I said, what I can offer is this kind of slightly unique perspective when it comes to horror and genre, because I think that niche still remains. I think it's underserved in India. I know there's some great stuff that's been made, there's some really interesting stuff coming out, and there's some incredible horror filmmakers in India, so I'm not for an instant saying that as a criticism. But I do feel that Western appealing, Indian appealing horror film or sci-fi film or whatever hasn't been made yet.
So, for an audience that hasn't seen Ghoul, could you give us a small description of what the movie was about?
Sure. So Ghoul is about a young, idealistic army interrogator who is immediately after graduating from the academy, is sent to an isolated, enhanced interrogation facility in some nondescript part of the country. And on the one hand, she wants to impress the powers that be with her kind of zeal, because she feels insecure that she's a Muslim in a time in the future of this fictional country, which is, you know, it's kind of, we're heading towards that Hindu Rashtra territory, so a Muslim soldier is kind of a minority in the army at this point. So she wants to kind of prove that she is a loyal citizen, but on the other hand, she begins to suspect that her dissident father has actually been at this very facility, and that her presence there might be in some way connected to him having been there. And at the same time, this rather kind of notorious terrorist arrives at the facility, and it's her job to interrogate him. And there's something very kind of sinister and strange about this prisoner, and that is what unfolds over the. Go watch the series. That's that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
So could you tell us something about the locations that you all shot when it was, when you all were shooting Ghoul?
Yeah. So we shot at this place, I think it was called Goregaon Veterinary College, right? And it was these very kind of brutalist, very stark and basic buildings which just lent themselves to this look. And like, it's one of those things, right? It's like the location manager comes and shows me the 5 choices that he's found, and it's like it's this one, like it's just this one, there's no competition, like of course it has to be this, right? So we were very lucky to have found that place, and because it was being renovated, I think half of it was like abandoned anyway, so the exteriors were done there, and we made our own like fencing, and we had our searchlights, and we got our dogs and our rain machines, and it was fantastic. Like, it was brilliant. I think we shot out there for 1 day and 2 nights. It was in the middle of the monsoon, so it was very rainy even without the rain machines. So we all got, sniffles, very wet throughout for 12-hour periods. We had to deal with background artists who weren't too happy and standing in the rain with their gas masks and their guns. We'd keep on losing background artists to the chai tent in between shots. And we had dogs who were very well behaved. First time working with dogs, they were awesome. Very sweet Alsatians, German Shepherds. And yeah, it was fantastic. And then the interiors we shot in the basement of the Tulip Star Hotel, which has now been demolished and is being rebuilt as something or other. Very strange place. An abandoned hotel which has been standing for 20 years. A place where the skeleton staff that remain there, they literally saying don't go to the second floor. It's haunted. So we're like, of course, let's go to the second floor, quick. and in the second floor, there's still these rooms with the beds that have been made rotting and old TV sets covered in mold. So it was a very evocative place. In the basement itself, you could just, in these old kitchens, which they still use sometimes for some, they did still have weddings there in the ballroom, which is a bizarre place to have a wedding, if you ask me. But it smelt pretty bad. And the sewers that ran under Juhu, there was water treatment centers in the basement of this hotel. You could just smell the sewage, right? There were times when it stank. And where we were eating lunch in the car park underneath the hotel, you just hear a rush of water and this horrific smell, and you'd realize that, I don't know, it's like God just flushed the toilet, and all this shit is just flowing underneath this hotel. So it smelled really bad. There were some areas like the water treatment corridor where we shot the main prison cells that was so full of methane gas that if you lit a lighter, the flame would go like that. It was crazy. And that's the thing about India, right? We could shoot there. You in England, it would have cost so much more money, and they would have been health and safety. We wouldn't be able to shoot in a place with raw sewage or gas or whatever. But in this place, it was like a playground of amazing locations. You turn a corner, amazing location. This room, amazing location. It was incredible. Old rusting boilers and water tanks. I mean, it added relatively small budget for Ghoul, added massive location value to what we were doing. And then when we had to add on a little bit for the when we made it into a series, when Netflix came on board, I think there was one society in Mumbai that we wanted to in South Bombay that we wanted to shoot this big scene where they're burning books in the courtyard, and we were there, and it was called Shanti Niketan. So the people of Shanti Niketan, because they told us to get out just as we were about to light the fire, and they were like, you can't light the fire unless you pay us more money. And like, do you know what that does to a crew? You've got all this crew here, you've got your extras, you've got this books, and they knew that our master shot was about to go and we were going to light the fire. Then the society secretary comes out and he's like, you can't film anymore unless you pay, I don't know how much money he was asking production. So they were trying to extort us. And like, I remember at that moment, like I was going to go to the secretary's office and start smashing windows, but I literally, the production had to kind of like hold me back because I have quite a short temper, so that really bothered me. But in a way, it tells you something about filmmaking, right? Because as that was happening, I was thinking, okay, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I was thinking in my head, okay, you can just do the whole thing as a top shot. Just do the whole thing as a top shot. You don't need to see the surroundings anyway. It'll be cool. The fire in the middle. The book's going on. We'll just track up. We'll crane up. It'll be really cool. And yeah, it's a really nice shot. At the end of the day, when you see it in episode 1, it's this top shot that kind of goes up and up and up and up away from the flames, and it's a really nice moment. Not as nice as what we would have had if the Shanti Niketan people had allowed us to stay in the location like they promised, but that was not to be. We had like an archway we were going to track back, and there was like this lovely, these old buildings around, like a what do you call it? What's the name for an old kind of housing society?
Cooperative society.
Yeah, something like that. But it was like a very old school, and like we were going to track through these arches, and the fire was going to be in the middle, and it was like my favorite shot. Oh man. But anyway, it's fine. I get over it.
Were there any untoward incidents or interesting episodes besides the one you narrated while shooting this series?
Not really. To be honest, like, it was a good shoot. Like, I had an amazing crew, an amazing cast, amazing producers, and I think because it was so well put together. I mean, every shoot has its issues, right? Every shoot. But this one relatively was pretty sorted, right? So I have no complaints really, except the main complaint would be because it was so well put together. I think it kind of spoiled me because I was like, oh, maybe all shoots are like this. They're not. They're not. They're not. But there were some funny moments. I'm just trying to think. I think one of the funniest things that happened on the set of Ghoul that I'll always remember, and I believe I still have somewhere on a hard drive, was there's a moment in the corridor underneath in the prison corridor where Radhika's character Nida, she hears the sound of the ghoul screaming from up the corridor, right? And it's and she kind of spins around, and like when she hears it's meant to be kind of almost a jump scare. And the guy who was playing the ghoul at that moment was this very lovely giant of a man called Surinder, and he was playing this character called Fulad Singh. And Fulad Singh, because we'd just done this shot, he was standing at the end of the corridor, and he was, where she was meant to look. And he comes to me before the take, and he says, Patrick, listen, what I'm going to do is, on the cue, you cue me, and I'm going to like make a really scary sound, and then Radhika can react to that, and it will be better. And I was like, yeah, great. Awesome suggestion. Like, thank you so much. So he goes up the corridor, and he stands behind the corner, like ready. Radhika doesn't know. And I was like, okay, roll camera, like Radhika's walking down the corridor, and I was like, surrender. And he goes, woo! Like like this giant man making this ridiculous high-pitched sound. That was hilarious, and Radhika obviously just laughed. And next take, it was like, maybe I'll clap or something like that. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Thank you so much for your ghost sound. It was great. That was funny. Anyway,
in Ghoul, the terror of the unreal collides with the horror of reality, and the ancient collides with the modern. As a horror writer and a filmmaker, is this a clever yet twisted way of saying that good triumphs over evil?
Well, it's a complicated one with Ghoul because I'm not sure good really does triumph over evil at the end. I think that evil is summoned to deal with evil, right? There's no real happy resolution at the end of Ghoul. Sorry, spoiler alert. The Ghoul is essentially an agent of destruction and vengeance, and something that probably enjoys its job a bit too much. And Nida's character is put in such a predicament and a kind of unwinnable situation that she actually ends up siding with the monster, because the people that she is working with maybe are even worse. And I think that that's a trope that we see in horror quite regularly, for example, in zombie films, like George Romero's zombie films. It's where, you know, the people are the real monsters, the monsters aren't as bad as the people, you know. I think that was there in Ghoul. I don't always agree with that, because a flesh-eating corpse is worse than a bad person, but, you know, whatever, it's fine. It's a metaphor, whatever. So, yeah, I think Ghoul was fairly bleak, to be honest, and I think that, as we can see in the current world, good doesn't triumph very often. I think in history, if you really look at it, good does not triumph the majority of the time, love does not win the majority of the time, and misery is the constant that has kind of seen humanity through. Somehow we've bumbled forward and survived, but right now in history, the bad guys are very much winning, in my opinion, and you know, we're heading towards some very dark times, darker times than I could have possibly imagined when we were making Ghoul. You know, we started in 2015, so yeah, 2014.
Two of your series, Ghoul and Laila, both deal with dystopian themes. I find that very similar to Lars von Trier's style of filmmaking, where he deals often with dystopian themes. But he deals with psychological breakdowns and societal decay. You deal with, from a personal perspective, but you deal with the collapse of society as a whole. So do you see any similarities between the films of yours and Lars von Trier's?
Lars von Trier, I'm not sure. I mean, he's exploring areas of the human psyche for sure, and he's quite shocking. I'm not sure I would fit him in within the kind of dystopia genre, necessary subgenre. I would say, I'm just trying to think. I mean, Lars von Trier was very influential because of his dogma style, which is often wheeled out whenever anybody wants to talk about European cinema and stuff. But I loved the film Festen by Thomas Vinterberg, and I loved it because of the camera work to a large degree, and that kind of very fluid handheld style, which felt so liberating and exciting at the time. Then that kind of evolved into stuff like 28 Days Later with one of the Dogma filmmakers, DOP's Anthony Dodd Mantle, who had worked so much with Vinterberg, I think, and Lars von Trier. And there was stuff like Breaking the Waves, which was very powerful. Yeah, but it was really Festen, the celebration in English is called. That really stuck with me just because of how exciting the camera work was, and it is such a brilliant film. I remember thinking also, as well with 28 Days Later, but similarly also, like the way Peter Jackson shot his first horror film, Bad Taste. Like he shot that with, I think it was like a Super 8 camera, and I think he was so lightweight with the camera, running around doing these crazy shots, that I remember watching that as a kid and just thinking, man, this is so cool. And then similarly, Sam Raimi with Evil Dead 2, the way he flung the camera around. Those are the films that made me so excited about filmmaking and so excited about being the person who could decide how a film was shot and how it looked. At the time, when I was a kid, becoming interested in cinema, I didn't really understand that there was a director of photography. But of course, now as a director, like I am somebody who takes a lot of control and a lot of care over the shots, how I see them, right? The shots, how I shoot something is something that I decide upon, and of course, I will consult with the DOP and we will work it together and they will suggest and say maybe like this, or how can we achieve what you're saying the best way. That's how I like to have relationships with a DOP. I'm not a director who will just allow a DOP to cover a scene. Like, no. Like, I want to tell the story my way, and I feel like if you watch my films, or my shows rather, you can, as a director, you can see a kind of similarity in style. Like, I feel like there's a taste that comes through there. What were we saying? Yeah, as far as like dystopian stuff goes, I suppose I was influenced by stuff like Blade Runner, 1984. There's the John Hurt film, which made in 1984. Oh man, yeah, it's got John Hurt who stars in it, and Richard Burton, who plays like the kind of head torturer. And I remember that film as a VHS tape that we had at home that I would watch a lot, and that stuck with me a lot, you know, as a kid. 1984, the film. I watched the film before I even read the book. So I think that kind of dystopian imagery, Blade Runner, 1984. What other ones did I watch at the time? I can't remember. I'm probably forgetting quite a lot. But that whole idea of oh yeah, of course. Like, me and my brother used to play the role-playing game Cyberpunk in the village. There was a few geeks like me and my brother, and we used to play the role-playing game tabletop Cyberpunk, which is now an amazing video game, by the way. But we played that a lot, and as that was from the ages of like 11 to like 16 probably, and at that age everything is just imprinting on your brain. So I think a lot of you know, the inspiration for Ghoul and Layla, although Layla is not my story, it comes from there. You know, it's Cyberpunk, Blade Runner, Akira, 1984. You know, that kind of very bleak vision of the future. And funnily enough, when you look at what's happening now, William Gibson, Neuromancer, those books that established cyberpunk as a genre, they're kind of probably the closest to coming true, right? It's the big business, it's the corporations who are now, you know, who inside the cyberpunk world are ruling the world, and even more so than nation states. They're becoming all powerful, and then of course you've got this technology, VR and the internet, which is often shown as a kind of physical space in those books. So I mean, we're you know, if you really look at it, we're living in a time when the sci-fi writers who might be correct were the cyberpunk pioneers back in the 80s.
Betaal was a very interesting concept. It deals with the whole colonial past coming back to haunt us. And it reminded me, in a very subtle way though, of Gene Roland's Zombie Lake, which has these undead Nazi soldiers coming back to attack the villagers and stuff.
Okay.
But with a social and political message. Has this been like a recurring theme in your filmmaking?
So Betaal was interesting, right? Because it was like, as you say, like Zombie Lake is a good example, but there was also Dead Snow, right? Dead Snow 1 and 2. And Dead Snow was funny, right? Because it was like the one zombie Nazi film that kind of got it right. There's been others. I think there was like...
Shockwaves.
Right, and there was also, there was like stuff like, there was other war films like The Bunker, which had Ray Stevenson, which was also about Nazi zombies. There was also a mainstream film which I think was produced by J.J. Abrams called Overlord, which wasn't very good, and it should have been. But it's like, that whole idea of zombie Nazis was just so fun. And Dead Snow 2 was such a fun film that I just thought, oh my God, you know, zombie redcoats. It's so obvious. Like, why hasn't anybody done zombie redcoats? There's no zombie redcoats. So at the time I was like, okay, but zombie redcoats would be fun in the time of 1857, right? So we've got the Indian uprising, and we've got the people they kill coming back to kill them, the mutineers, or whatever you call them, the freedom fighters. In England, it's called the Indian Mutiny. In India, it's called the uprising. So whatever you want to call it, probably more of an uprising. So they, yeah, I just thought zombie redcoats. So I pitched it. Netflix were looking for another follow-up to Ghoul, because at the time Ghoul was caught up in some litigation between, I think, Hotstar and Reliance, I think. Don't know why, it was too complicated for me to understand. But we couldn't make a second season of Ghoul, so they were like, make something else. And I was like, okay, zombie redcoats in 1857. And they were like, okay, we love zombie redcoats, but just make it present day. And I was like, okay! But the funny thing was, I wanted it to be a comedy, right? I wanted it to be like Dead Snow. But for whatever reason, Blumhouse was involved and Netflix were involved. They both said they wanted to have a serious horror. So I was like, okay. So I tried to do a serious horror with zombie redcoats, and maybe the idea and concept was just a bit too kind of kitsch and fun to make it serious. I realize now that in order to make a kind of serious film like that work, I felt like probably we should have made fewer zombie Britishers and made like 5 really scary ones and made the violence way more graphic and really focused on the horror aspect and making it much more bloody and brutal and shocking. But I think what I tried to do was a bit too big and a bit too grand on scale, having a zombie army. It just overstretched the budget. We weren't able to shoot it as carefully as I would have liked. I feel like the project was a bit too big for me at that point in my career, and if it was a bit smaller and more contained and more focused, probably we could have done something that ended up a bit more, I don't know, successful, I suppose. But also, the funny thing is that my family history is like, it's a bit colonial, I have to say, sorry. As in, for example, my grandmother was born in what was then British India, which is now Peshawar, Pakistan. Like, it was a colonial family. And one of my ancestors, this guy called Thomas Graham, it's either John Graham, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's John Graham, which is also my name, by the way. My first name is John. In my family, it's John, Patrick, David, and Matthew, and it's just these names that kind of recur again and again and again. So there was this guy who founded what was in South Africa, Grahamstown. And it still remains to this day, but it's called something else now. They renamed it, as they should have done. But basically, he was a bit of right. He murdered thousands of the local population, and he's quoted in the Oxford English Dictionary of Quotations. He's quoted as saying that we have to use the appropriate amount of terror on the population in order to establish our city, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. So he was an evil colonialist, right? You know, he was a bad guy. And actually the British, through their imperial history, they were bad. I mean, they did some horrific things. And I feel like it's easy to use Nazis as your default bad guys, for example. But really, I mean, what the British have done to the world in their imperial conquest has had much worse lasting ramifications than what the Nazis did. Obviously, it's been a longer time, so it's kind of easier to see the effects of what the British Empire had on the world. But I think that a lot of regions got broken by those European empires, and they're still broken to this day, and we're still seeing the after effects of what the British did. But not only the future that they inflicted on the world, but at the time itself, I mean, how many millions of people died because of the British? And how many countries did they invade? So the British their actions were evil, right? Even if at home it was a relatively progressive and liberal, well, not liberal, but a progressive country with a burgeoning democracy, with, you know, center of the Industrial Revolution. So there's lots of progression happening at the expense of other people. So I was always quite conflicted about my family history, because on the one hand, when I was a teenager, it's like, oh, cool, my family were part of the British Empire. But in adulthood, when you mature a little, you're like, no, that they were the bad guys, right? They were the bad guys, even though they were probably lovely as individual people, and my grandparents were lovely, lovely people. They still participated in crimes against humanity, probably. So with that in mind, I thought it would be funny that the big bad guy, the evil demon lord in Betaal, was in fact my ancestor. So he's called John Lyndoch, which is in fact my name. My middle name is Lyndoch and my first name is John. And the name of the guy who established Grahamstown, John Lyndoch, was him. So I refer to my own family heritage as the bad guy in Betaal, which is my little meta thing. And not only that, I thought it was very clever. I thought I was very, very clever, because I was making, as an English filmmaker in India, I kind of tried to slip in there that it was cultural appropriation, that even though as a white filmmaker I'm trying to reference an evil past of the British, I myself am culturally appropriating Indian culture at this very moment. So there was lots going on there in my head, but yeah, in the end, you know, it is what it is.
So do you think Ghoul and Betaal kind of exist in the same universe? Because in Betaal we have India's colonial past haunting us, and in Ghoul we have a modern day authoritarian military regime suppressing society.
I don't think they exist in the same universe because the tone is different. I think that I feel like Ghoul took itself quite seriously, and Betaal doesn't take itself so seriously, right? So tonally they're a bit different. I couldn't see you know, Nida and Colonel D'Cunha next to Vineet's character and the soldiers in Betaal. It's just different. I think in retrospect, I would have preferred to have lent more into that gung-ho, muscular jingoism in Betaal. It should have been something more like Starship Troopers, you know? I should have had them flag waving and like with two guns and zombies dying, and made it more of a satire, a parody of nationalistic stories. I mean, that's all we get nowadays, are these war films with like men with huge muscles and stained vests with two guns. It's bullshit, and I would have liked to have taken the piss out of that. I wanted Betaal to be more of a comedy, a satire, but in the end, my desire at the back of my head, I always saw it as a satire, but in reality, practically I was making a serious show, so it just didn't quite gel together in the end.
So with Dancing on the Grave, you moved from movie filmmaking to documentary filmmaking. What led you to the documentaries, and was it a significant change for making a film?
Yeah, it was a significant change. It was really just a practical thing. It was the beginning of COVID. Betaal had come out in May. It had a very negative reaction from the critics, which really affected me quite badly. I mean, COVID was a difficult time anyway, but like, I think I had probably the worst day of my life on my own, having been on my own for the last 2 months, only to be on my own for the next couple of months. You know, I mean, I had friends up the road who I would sneak out, you know, sometimes to go see, and they were a lifeline. I had my partner who was in Pune at the time, so, you know, we'd chat and stuff. But basically, I was receiving this horrific reaction by this group of critics who if I ever see them, I will just push one of them off a balcony like that scene in, Cloud Atlas. I mean, some of these critics are just scum, right? I understand that the job is necessary, but the reaction to Betaal was like infantile in its kind of lack of curiosity and its kind of stupid, jeering, sneering reviews that I unfortunately read on that day when they all came out. It was very difficult. So at that time I was just like, what do I do? You know, that was when I think, you know, that was the beginning of the next phase of my life, right? When you receive such horrific reaction to such hard work that you're so positive about, that everybody's been telling you is good. I mean, all the producers were happy, Netflix were happy, they put a lot of money into the marketing. We weren't able to have a premiere because of the COVID restrictions. I think that was part of the problem, actually. I think critics like premieres because they like to feel special, but they're not. And I think that there was this kind of weird confluence of events that kind of led this kind of vociferous, horrific, hostile reaction to the show. And I mean, I still have to live with the fact that it has like 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't think is fair, genuinely. I think that I just look at the IMDb. I think I can live with 5.4 out of 10. I think that that's probably what it deserves. But 8%, I mean, that's stupid, right? Then it's saying that there's nothing of value, which just isn't the case. Because when I look at Betaal now, and I see other shows that do well in India, I'm just like, well, how is this getting a good review and this isn't? Do you know what I mean? That could be said about anything. I don't understand a lot of the time what is deemed to be good, and which is another issue I have with the audience, right? Maybe I just don't get it, right? But yeah, so that was a very long-winded way of segueing into India Today called me. I think it was at the end of 2020. I think it was like November or something like that. they called me with this. They were just starting their new slate. India Today were making a wing of their company that was going to focus on original documentary shows and films based upon their extensive archives of previous cases that had been, many of which had been reported by this guy Shams Tahir Khan, who was like this kind of criminologist, this expert reporter when it comes to crime, and very well-respected man. And India Today had this really interesting story that they had pitched to Amazon, and Amazon had I think literally had taken it off the top of the pile and said, we like this one, like that. They were that fast. So it's like they said they were looking for a cinematic director, and at the time I was like, well, do I want to do documentary? I love documentary shows. Like I studied documentary at undergrad and postgraduate level. I've always loved watching them. I love true crime, especially at the time. Making a Murderer. I think the documentary peak had kind of arrived with stuff like The Jinx, Making a Murderer, The Staircase, etc., etc. Now we get good stuff, but we also get too much stuff, right? It's kind of, now we just get this kind of onslaught, this kind of torrent of documentaries thrown at us, and I'm not sure the quality holds up as much as it used to. But at that time, it was a really interesting prospect because this high-budget OTT platform documentary hadn't been done yet, and it was clearly about to. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. But then I just read the story and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Just plot twist by plot twist. It's like, wow. And them telling me that we had access to the accused himself, like I just knew that it was something I wanted to do. And then for the next 2 years, I was working with India Today on a documentary. And it was a very steep learning curve. Like I was basing my understanding of how to approach documentary filmmaking from my love of documentaries, nothing else. Like I wasn't taught, no one mentored me or tutored me or told me how to make a documentary. I just figured it out, which is surprising because I'm actually quite an unintelligent person. But yeah, we had a good budget, can't complain. It was a difficult project in that I was learning a lot, and I feel like in filmmaking, you have to show, you have to believe in your opinion and your approach. You have to, right? You have to have confidence in what you're doing. But I think sometimes that can lead to a bit too much confrontation. We had there was conflict on that project, which I regret because. And there's no ill will between any of us now, but at the time there was lots of conflict particularly between me and I won't go into detail, but there was conflict, and now I could very quickly see that the reason the conflict was there was because we were equally as passionate about the project, right, and about telling the best story. And I hope that we remain good friends after a fair few heated arguments on set. The post-production became quite difficult because I wanted this, and I was arguing with the producers quite a lot. But it was a learning curve because I realized, as a human being, I realized that I couldn't keep on filmmaking being so volatile and so prescriptive. Like I had to calm down a bit. So ever since that project, I have calmed down and I've mellowed, and I've realized that, going forward into my 40s, that if you really want to work well, I think for me anyway, I think it's about being nicer. I think probably less. So yeah, now I'm less.
So I haven't watched your latest documentary,
Dupatta Killer.
The Dupatta Killer. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Dupatta Killer was, I was approached by Docubay and Juggernaut Productions to make a documentary which I'm still working on right now, which we're close to finishing. I can't say anything about it at the moment, but I'm very happy with how it's turned out. But there were certain moments during the process of this documentary that I'm doing right now where we had to pause production. And during the pause of production, we decided to just go off and quickly make another documentary. And this literally, we did it in like 7 or 8 months. Like we just did it, right? And part of the reason we were able to do it was because we had this journalist called Mukesh Kumar in Goa, who gave us amazing access. Again, it's all about the access. Gave us amazing access. all these amazing characters, and we explored the subject of this this criminal, a convicted criminal called Mahanand Nayak. And he is in a prison in Goa, convicted of the murder of 2 women. The accusation against him was of, I think it was 14 women, but he was only found guilty of 2. So even though he was only found guilty of 2, I say only, it's still pretty bad to kill 2 women, but I think the common belief is that he did in fact kill 14 people. It was just impossible to prove because many of these cases were so old and there was just no physical evidence. It was all circumstantial. But to me, like I go in as a pretty objective, and I read all the court documents, I listen to the interviews, and I form my opinion. And my opinion was that he has probably done the rest of these crimes too. Otherwise, it's just too infinitesimal a coincidence that, you know, his next door neighbor died in this way. You know, do you know what I mean? Like, although it wasn't proven, it just seemed to me, yeah, like, who else? But then you always have to think, it's the same with the dancing on the grave. I wasn't 100% sure that that Shraddhanand, Swami Shraddhanand, is in fact guilty. I'm not sure to this day. I think it's very likely that he is, but no one could ever really prove it, even though he was convicted in the end. So it's the same with Mahanand Nayak, but I was even more sure that Mahanand Nayak was guilty of the other 12 murders than I am sure that Swami Shraddhanand was guilty of the murder of his wife. So that kind of quelled my initial worries about kind of framing him as a serial killer, right? I think he is a serial killer, even though he was only convicted of the 2 murders. And even if he is only guilty of 2 murders, that is enough for me to want to make a documentary that says, keep this broken human being inside prison. And I think that's pretty much what we were doing with this documentary. And I think one of the things about it which struck me the most is how the justice system failed the surviving victim of his. It failed her. And this is a subject that's going to be part of my next documentary, is that if a young woman tells people that person me and no one believes her, then what else exactly is she meant to do? What is she meant to do, right? And this is very much what happened in this Mahanand Nayak case, which is again, what really drew me to the story. A young woman went to the police, helped them catch what could be a serial killer, and then ultimately a high court judge, middle-aged man, judged that she was not telling the truth because he disagreed with the way she looked in certain photographs taken against her will. And because her story changed a little over time. She wasn't a perfect witness. No one is, right? So that to me was a massive letdown for that young woman. And I remember when we screened the film in Goa, the local Goan figures, some quite prominent figures in society, were very unhappy with how we portrayed it. But my stance was, but you're so unhappy with me saying that this guy's a serial killer, but you've spared no thought for this young woman who was let down. And not only let down by the justice system, but some of the people in this room. Like, for example, the lawyer who managed to quash her case in the High Court. You know, I don't know how one can live with themselves if they can kind of treat a helpless young person like that. So, anyway, that's one good thing about documentaries, is that you're actually able to challenge things head on that make you angry. So, yeah.
So I read this bit of trivia on you about your TV series and your films having a reference to 34 GMD. So what is 34 GMD?
34 GMD is when I was in London. So I went to university in this place called Royal Holloway, and I have some lovely friends who are like my family. You know how it is. And when we left university, we lived together in this house called 34 GMD, and in London, and on and off we were all living there for many years, and it was a place of, you know, happiness, enjoyment, and we all, you know, we're all still very close with each other. They're like my sisters, you know. We're a house full of women for the most part, usually with 1 or 2 guys, and yeah, it's like family, extended family.
Do you see yourself moving from the horror genre and doing more stuff, say, with science fiction and fantasy?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not tied to the horror genre. I just think it's the most accessible genre for me as a foreigner living in India. I feel it's also something I've set myself a goal. I want to make a Western style, but deeply rooted Indian horror that appeals to the mass Indian audience and it manages to translate across the world to be popular in other markets too. Maybe it's impossible, I'm sure lots of people would say that it's impossible, but I don't know why Thailand can make a great horror film, but India can't. Do you know what I mean? I don't say that like India hasn't made great horror films, it has, but one that translates abroad, right? Like why can't India do it? The answer is they absolutely can do it. It requires a slight change of mentality from the people with the money and from the platforms. To be honest, there's lots of horror films in production right now. Easily one of them could be what I'm talking about. There's also horror coming up on Netflix, on Amazon. There's been some great shows like Cough recently on Prime, which is a prime example of an Indian horror story, which does work abroad. Then it becomes more about kind of marketing and word of mouth. I think Ghoul actually did cross over pretty well. I think that it had an equal popularity with foreign audiences than it did in India. But as I say, I think a lot of people would consider Ghoul to be foreign with the Blumhouse influence and with me being a foreigner. But the other thing is like, who cares like where it comes from? Who cares? I understand the identity politics behind a white person telling Indian stories. I get it. Like I totally get it. Which is why I need to be very sensitive and mindful of the kind of stories I try to tell, which is why horror works so well. Also sci-fi. Like I developed a sci-fi horror comedy show with my good friends at SK Global, now Jaya Entertainment, or then Jaya Entertainment. We almost got it with Blumhouse into Amazon Prime back in 2022, I think it was. We almost managed to get it going. But there was some issue with the contracts and the agreement that we weren't quite able to push it across the line, which is a massive regret for me because like literally I pitched it to Aparna Purohit. She loved it. She was like, let's make it. And I was like, yeah, it's what you want to hear at the end of a pitch call, right? It very rarely happens. It's like, let's make it, yeah. But then the paperwork didn't work out. So I almost got it, but didn't work. But that's still there. I have the series mapped out, 2 episodes written. But I think the idea now is to maybe turn it into a feature film. Because in some ways now I'm feeling like the OTT space is a little less appealing for various reasons. And I think maybe feature films is the way to go. Especially just for that kind of, maybe that crossover potential. There's a kind of excitement about feature films, I feel, and there's a kind of fatigue about the OTT space. I don't know. But when it comes to work, I'm always open to whatever comes along, basically.
So, what's the future for you in terms of films and TV series?
The future for me is I'm writing 2 horror films right now, which I believe will end up getting made, but who knows? In this industry, anything can happen, right? Anything can fall apart at any moment, right? It's a miracle anything ever comes out. That's a kind of a cliche, I know, but it's true, right? It's so difficult to actually get something into production, get something through production, to get something through post-production and then release it. It's very, very difficult. So I don't know, but I would say that it's very likely that I will have 2 films as me as writer, possibly a couple with me as director, let's see. I've got this documentary that we're just finishing right now for Docubase, so that will be coming out probably in the next few months. I have multiple projects that are in the pitch stages, which is normal of people in my position. You always have like 2 or 3 pitch decks or spec scripts that are circulating, and you're kind of sitting there like maybe one of them will get picked up. Let's see. But I'm relatively positive. I'm just happy to be working and doing what I love to do every day, which is, if I'm not on a set, which I'm not as much as I'd like to, I'm writing. And to be able to make a living making shit up is a wonderful, wonderful occupation. Yes.
So thank you, Patrick, for joining us in this excellent conversation about
you.
your films and your TV series. Here's wishing you the best of luck from the Bollywood Crypt team.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for being a part of Director's Cut.
Thank you so much. Can I just plug one thing? Which is I have a very good friend, a very, very smart friend called Luke Houghton. And he is a passionate author who's written many, many really good books. Now, he lives in Japan, old friend from university, and me and him have collaborated together to write a book called Don't Save the Cat. And I would urge you, if you're interested in this conversation, to go out and purchase a copy of the book. You can get it on your Kindle Unlimited, it's there too, and you can get a hard copy sent all the way from England, which might cost a little bit more, but it's worth it. And enjoy it, because it's genuinely a good piece of work, which I think we're both very, very proud of. He's done most of the heavy lifting on the writing, but if you like that kind of dystopian, satirical future sci-fi, I'm sure you'll like it. Then you'll like this book. And not only that, he's also written an assortment of other sci-fi books which are really good. And I mean, yes, self-published, but the thing is, it's very hard to actually get into the literary, get a literary agent, let alone get something published from the outside. You know, it's one of these things. You need the contacts. You need. It's a networking kind of system, and you know, it's difficult. So I'm not making excuses. They're genuinely good books, and I would urge you to read Don't Save the Cat.
Thanks for being here, and
No
it was
worries.
a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Cheers. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us for further episodes of Director's Cut. This is Sandesh from Bollywood Crypt, signing out.